Moving on, the President was honored to announce that Lieutenant General McMaster will be his national security advisor. General McMaster served his nation in the United States Army for over 3 decades, including during Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, and Desert Storm. The President met with many distinguished and qualified candidates for the position, and he has said that he will continue to consider many of them for other positions within the administration. He is especially pleased that Lieutenant General Kellogg will stay on as the National Security Council Chief of Staff. The President is proud to welcome General McMaster to the team. We have full authority to structure the office to his desires to best serve its ultimate mission, which is to protect the American interests at home and abroad. This morning, Secretary Kelly and the Department of Homeland Security released memos regarding the implementation of 2 of the President's executive orders that are designed to protect the homeland. These 2 memos provide explicit guidance to DHS staff on how to carry out 2 executive orders signed by the President on January 25th, one dealing with interior enforcement and one dealing with border security. Perhaps most critically, the President is empowering DHS to carry out the immigration laws currently on the books. Of course, DHS gave a full briefing on these memos this morning, but just to briefly summarize a few of the facts. The memo regarding the executive order enhancing public safety in the interior of the United States outlines several practices and policies in order to strengthen the efficient and faithful execution of this country's immigration laws. That includes hiring more ICE agents and officers, as well as additional mission support and legal staff necessary to support their activities. This memo also directs the establishment of the Victims of Immigration Crime Engagement Office within ICE, fulfilling another major campaign promise of the President. This office will facilitate the engagement with victims and their families to ensure that their questions and concerns regarding immigration enforcement efforts are addressed. The memo regarding the executive order border security and immigration enforcement improvements outlines the steps that DHS will take to secure the nation's southern border, prevent further illegal immigration, and to repatriate illegal immigrants swiftly, consistently, and humanely. This includes immediately identifying and allocating all sources of available funding for the planning, design, construction, and maintenance of a wall along our southern border, and hiring of additional personnel, including 5,000 additional CBP border agents, and provided. The President's team this weekend also had a very productive meeting on the President's plan to repeal and replace Obamacare and ensure that it is replaced with a system that works for all Americans. During his speech before the Munich Security Conference on Saturday, the Vice President conveyed the administration's unwavering commitment to Europe's peace and prosperity, especially remembering the tens of thousands of Americans who gave their lives to defend those ideals during both World War I and II. These shared sacrifices are the backbone of our alliance and our mission of security through strength. During his time in Munich, the Vice President also met with 9 world leaders. The Vice President and these leaders discussed the issues most pressing to them, including the escalating violence in eastern Ukraine and the role of NATO in the fight against ISIS. The Vice President also met in Brussels with the President of Vice President Tusk of the Council of the European Union and the NATO Secretary General. As a candidate for office, President Trump actually called attention repeatedly to the fact that for too long, many of our other NATO allies have not been sharing the financial burden. The President looks forward to working closely with NATO to advance our shared objectives. A strong NATO means a safer world, and the United States looks forward to working with our partners in NATO to achieve just that. Before I take your questions, I want to address the recent threats and acts of vandalism on Jewish community centers throughout the country. The President said this morning, I just want to reiterate, quote, "The anti-Semitic threats targeting our Jewish community centers are horrible and painful, and a very sad reminder of the work that we must do, the work that must be done to root out hate and prejudice and evil." With that, take some of your questions. Jim Stenson.
Sean?
Yeah.
Sean, thank you. I was curious if the President regrets or wants to clarify his characterization, by the way, I have 2 questions, of the media as an enemy of the American people.
I think the President has been very clear that certain outlets have gone out of their way to not represent his record accurately, and it is a concern to him. And I think some reporters, he has deep respect for the First Amendment, for the role of the press. I've addressed this multiple times in the past. He has a healthy respect for the press, but I think that it's a two-way street. as I've also said before. And I think that the president understands that certain outlets have gone out of their way to not be completely accurate and fair in their coverage of what's going on.
Speaking of the media, I've noticed 2 times in the last week that you've been directly contradicted by 2 members of the media, one of them Bill Maher of HBO, who said that in front of guests at Mar-a-Lago, the president was briefed on classified North Korean situation.
Say that again? I'm sorry.
The president and the prime minister of Japan were briefed in front of guests.
No, I didn't say that.
No. This is what was being said on HBO, that the president and the prime minister were briefed on classified information in front of guests at Mar-a-Lago. I just want to clarify, did that happen?
No.
Or did they go
No, I think I walked through this timeline before, Jim, and it's amazing. A photo gets put out, the president's got a piece of paper, and the immediate conclusion is he's got to be talking about classified information. The president was briefed on the situation in North Korea prior to the dinner in a skiff that's at Mar-a-Lago. He went and had dinner. He discussed the logistics of the press conference, which I've talked to you all about before. There was a question as to where to hold the press conference. They had a discussion about the logistics of it. And subsequent to that dinner, he was briefed again in a skiff with updates on the situation in North Korea. That's it, plain and simple. But to your first question, I think that it's amazing that the immediate jump of conclusion to several outlets was, well, there's a piece of paper. It must be classified. I don't, it's amazing to see that. And to see people jump to that conclusion that he's surrounded by his staff and members of the Japanese delegation. The conclusion is they must be doing something nefarious or wrong. In fact, he followed every procedure that's laid out. And I think in some cases it's disheartening to realize that those are the kind of immediate conclusions that somebody jumps to. So, when you talk about coverage, we have a free press. We have the right for our people to say and do what they believe. But at some point, it is incumbent upon people to try to get it right. And in that case, it wasn't even attempted. It was a jump to conclusion by many to say that there must be something else going on, when in fact we were able to provide a very, very clear tick-tock as to far as what had happened.
Let me ask you a question about the Vice President's European trip.
Yeah.
I'm curious whether he received any commitments from our European allies to commit more in terms of their financial contribution to NATO.
I think several of them. I saw Chancellor Merkel's comments previous to that, noting that they understand that the U.S. is asking for that commitment. Look, we're one of the only countries, there's a handful, that are doing what NATO requires, which is 2% of GDP. Some of them are at 1.2, 1.3, 1.5, and some of them are below that. But we've got to ask them to do what they agreed to do. And I think we've had a very positive reaction from most of these NATO countries that understand that the financial commitment that they agreed to is something that they need to live up to. And I think the Vice President continued to receive assurances, much like the President has through his foreign leader calls, where people not only understand it but are willing to follow through on it.
Is it an ongoing process?
Of course it's an ongoing. I think we need to follow up to make sure that that the commitments that they're making on the phone or in person, in the case of the Vice President, are followed.
John,
Yeah.
The National Center for Transgender Equality, citing reliable sources, says the Trump administration today will rescind Obama-era guidance requiring schools to allow transgender kids to use the restroom consistent with their gender identity. Will the Trump administration rescind that guidance?
Right now, that's an issue that the Department of Justice and the Department of Education are addressing. I would tell you that, and I think that there'll be further guidance coming from DOJ in particular with respect to not just the executive order, but also the case that's in front of the Supreme Court. The President has maintained for a long time that this is a states' rights issue and not one for the federal government. So while there'll be further guidance coming out on this, I think that all you have to do is look at what the President's view has been for a long time, that this is not something that the federal government should be involved in. This is a states' rights.
Thank you. I have 2 questions. One on the Immigration and Refugee Executive Order that we're expecting in the coming days. So that it withstands legal challenges, can you tell us what the language might look like as it relates to Syrian refugees?
I appreciate the effort, but when we have it ready, we'll get it out. And I think part of this is.
Ban on Syrian
Excuse me.
refugees?
I appreciate the second try, but we're not ready to announce it. And part of it is that we're making sure that it is completely ready to go. And so when we have that, we will get it out to you. And that the reason that we haven't announced it is it's not ready to be announced. And Scott Thillman.
Yeah, on Russia, critics of the president have said that at times he doesn't talk tough enough on the subject. General McMaster, though, has been labeled by a lot of people as being pretty hawkish. I'm curious what, if any, difference in tone or tenor or strategy we should expect now that they're working together.
Well, I think, as I mentioned a couple times, I think there is widespread praise for General McMaster and his understanding and command of national security matters, foreign policy matters. He's going to be a great asset to the president's national security team. But ultimately, the president's always been the decider, whether it's Russia or any other issue. And I think you're right. He has made it very clear that if he can get a deal with Russia, something that the last several administrations have tried to do, then he's going to do it. And if he can't, he won't. But he is going to try. And I think his success as a businessman and negotiator should be seen as a positive sign for him to be able to do that. But he understands that if he can find common ground on defeating ISIS and combating terrorism, growing the economy where we can find areas of economic interest, then we're going to do it. But that's where we're going to continue to work with Russia. If we can, he'll get a deal. If he can, he won't. If he won't, but he's going to try. And I think where others have failed, he's going to make sure that he does everything possible to make sure that if it's in the interest of the United States, he will get a deal. Vivian.
I just wanted to follow on that. You said that he has the full authority to structure his office as he sees fit. Does that extend to the Principals Committee as well? After he comes in and takes a look at the whole apparatus, if he advises the President that he would prefer not to have the Chief Strategist as a member of the Principals Committee, would the President...
I think the President has made clear to him, as I said to Vivian, he's got full authority to structure the national security team the way he wants. Obviously, it's something like that. He would come to the President and make that recommendation. But the President would take that under serious consideration. I don't want to go ahead with this person or that person or structure, but the President made it very clear with him and the other candidates that they had 100% control and authority over the National Security Committee. Thank you, guys. I'll see you tomorrow. No, he will stay on active duty.
Does that require Senate confirmation then?
No, he will stay on active duty. That was the case with Powell and I think some other folks. So,
one more clarification just before you go. So when the new EO comes out, you